Catherine stood before the mirror in her private chambers at Kensington Palace, adjusting the sapphire necklace that once belonged to Princess Diana. The weight of the jewels around her neck served as a constant reminder of the invisible chains that bound her to a life she could never have fully imagined when she first met William at St. Andrews University. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows as she prepared for another day of carefully orchestrated appearances. Gone were the days when she could simply throw on a pair of jeans and dash out for coffee. Every outfit she wore now carried diplomatic weight. The bright red coat she selected wasn't just fashion. It was a calculated choice that would photograph well and avoid clashing with any flags at today's state reception. Her phone buzzed on the dresser, but she couldn't answer it the way she once did. Royal protocol demanded that she never give autographs, never take selfies with the public, and certainly never engage in casual social media the way her university friends still did. She remembered the day her private secretary explained that her signature could be forged and used for fraudulent purposes. Even something as simple as signing a birthday card for a friend had become a security risk. The breakfast table was set with precision, but Catherine couldn't simply eat what she craved. Shellfish was forever off the menu, too risky for food poisoning during official engagements. Garlic was discouraged before public appearances. Even her favorite pasta dishes had to be eaten carefully, avoiding any possibility of sauce splashing on her outfit. She thought of her sister Pippa, who could still enjoy messy, casual meals without a dozen protocols governing every bite. William entered the room, already dressed in his military uniform for the morning's engagement. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes, a private language they'd developed over years of public scrutiny. In public, they could hold hands briefly, but passionate displays of affection were strictly forbidden. No kissing beyond a quick peck, no embracing for more than a moment. Their love had to be expressed in micro gestures, a hand on the small of her back, a shared smile across a crowded room. "The children are asking about voting again," William mentioned quietly. Catherine sighed. This was perhaps one of the hardest restrictions to explain to George, Charlotte, and Louis. The royal family must remain politically neutral, meaning she could never voice an opinion on government policies, never support a political candidate, never even hint at which way she might vote, if she were allowed to vote at all. The children would grow up in a democracy where their voices were uniquely silenced. Her dresser entered with the day's jewelry selections. Catherine couldn't simply wear her personal favorites anymore. Each piece was chosen for its message, its history, its diplomatic significance. The pearl earrings for mourning, the maple leaf brooch for Canadian visits, the shamrock pin for St. Patrick's Day. Her body had become a display case for national symbols. She thought back to her wedding day, when 2 billion people watched her transform from Catherine Middleton into the Duchess of Cambridge. What they didn't see were the hours of protocol training beforehand. How to sit with her ankles crossed, never her legs. How to exit a car without showing too much leg. How to hold her clutch purse in her left hand so her right was always free for handshakes. The clutch itself was a shield, a polite way to avoid hugging overly enthusiastic well-wishers. The restrictions extended far beyond public behavior. Catherine could no longer travel freely. Every trip required security assessments, advanced teams, and diplomatic clearance. Spontaneous weekend getaways were impossible. Even visiting her parents in Bucklebury required coordination with protection officers. She and William were forbidden from traveling together with all their children. The succession must be protected. This meant family vacations required careful planning to ensure the future of the monarchy wasn't risked in a single accident. Her wardrobe choices were no longer her own. Skirts must be weighted to prevent wind-related mishaps. Bright colors were encouraged to stand out in crowds, but never anything too fashionable that might overshadow the cause she was promoting. She'd learned to carry clear nail polish to stop runs in her stockings, to wear closed-toe shoes regardless of the weather, to ensure her hair was styled to withstand wind and rain without ever looking disheveled. The financial restrictions were equally binding. Catherine couldn't simply shop where she pleased or support businesses at random. Every purchase was scrutinized for its message. Buying British was essential, but she had to be careful not to show favoritism to any particular brand. The palace had to approve any gifts she received, and anything worth more than a nominal amount became property of the crown, not her personally. As she prepared to leave for the morning engagement, Catherine caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. The woman looking back was polished, perfect, and utterly controlled. She touched the engagement ring on her finger, Diana's sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It was beautiful, valuable beyond measure, and impossible to remove without causing a media sensation. The motorcade waited outside, engines running. Protection officers spoke quietly into their radios. Catherine took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and stepped into her public role. The woman who had once been free to live as she chose was gone, replaced by a future queen who carried the weight of centuries of tradition with every carefully measured step. The autumn rain pelted against the windows of Adelaide Cottage as Catherine sat with Charlotte, helping her with homework. These precious private moments were increasingly rare. She couldn't simply decide to homeschool her children or choose their teachers. Every educational decision required approval from courtiers, advisors, and ultimately the monarch. The schools must be prestigious enough for future royals, but not so elite as to seem out of touch with ordinary citizens. Charlotte looked up from her writing practice. "Mummy, why can't I have Instagram like Sophie's older sister?" The question pierced Catherine's heart. How could she explain that her daughter would never have the digital freedom her peers took for granted? No social media accounts, no casual photos with friends posted online, no normal teenage rebellion documented in tweets and stories. Every image of Charlotte would be controlled, curated, and released through official channels. Catherine's own phone sat silent on the counter. She'd had to surrender her personal email accounts, her old phone numbers, her entire digital identity when she married William. Royal communications were monitored, archived, and could be subject to freedom of information requests. She couldn't text freely with old friends, couldn't maintain the casual WhatsApp groups that kept her university friendships alive. Every message she sent could potentially become a headline. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest restriction. Her circle of trusted friends had necessarily shrunk. New friendships were almost impossible when everyone she met had potential ulterior motives, selling stories, seeking royal endorsement, or simply basking in reflected glory. She couldn't confide in anyone outside the family without wondering if her words would appear in tomorrow's tabloids. The loneliness of the position was something Diana had warned about in her secret recordings, but experiencing it firsthand was entirely different. Even her charitable work came within visible boundaries. Catherine felt passionately about early childhood development, but she couldn't advocate for specific government policies or funding. She could raise awareness, but never campaign. She could comfort the suffering, but never criticize the systems that caused their pain. Her voice was powerful but muzzled, able to draw attention to issues but forbidden from proposing solutions that might seem political. The religious restrictions weighed heavily, too. As future Supreme Governor of the Church of England, she couldn't explore other faiths freely, couldn't even be seen entering a Catholic church without careful diplomatic preparation. Her children would be raised Anglican regardless of any personal spiritual feelings. The faith that should be most personal was instead a matter of constitutional requirement. Her body was no longer entirely her own. Every pound gained or lost was scrutinized. Pregnancy speculation began the moment she wore a loose-fitting dress or declined a glass of wine at a state dinner. She couldn't seek medical treatment privately. Royal doctors must be informed of everything from a common cold to more serious conditions. Her medical records were matters of state interest. The rules about accepting gifts were particularly frustrating when it came to her children. Well-meaning members of the public would send toys, clothes, and treats, but strict protocols governed what could be kept. Expensive items were cataloged and often donated. Food was destroyed for security reasons. The children couldn't understand why the homemade cookies from a kind grandmother in Yorkshire had to be thrown away, why the hand-knitted sweater from a well-wisher in Canada couldn't be worn. Catherine's movements were tracked constantly. She couldn't take a different route on a morning jog without notifying security. Every deviation from the schedule required authorization. The spontaneity that had once defined her life, deciding to meet a friend for lunch, popping into a bookshop, taking a last-minute weekend trip, was completely extinct. Her life was planned in 6-month increments, every hour accounted for in the court circular. Financial independence was another lost freedom. Despite the wealth surrounding her, Catherine had no personal income she controlled. Every expense was scrutinized by palace accountants. She couldn't invest in businesses, couldn't support a friend's startup, couldn't even buy an expensive gift without justification. The money spent on her wardrobe was criticized if too high, yet she was expected to always look immaculate. The delicate balance between frugality and royal standards was exhausting. Her relationship with her own family had changed irrevocably. The Middletons, once able to see their daughter whenever they wished, now had to schedule visits weeks in advance. Security sweeps of their home preceded each royal visit. They couldn't speak freely about their daughter's life, couldn't share normal grandparent photos on social media, couldn't even mention small family moments without considering the implications. The close-knit family she'd grown up in had been transformed by protocols and procedures. Most painfully, Catherine couldn't fully protect her children from the pressures they would face. She watched George beginning to understand that he was different, that his future was predetermined in ways his siblings weren't. She saw the confusion in their eyes when they couldn't do things their cousins could. Birthday parties required guest lists approved by security. Playdates happened only with carefully vetted families. Their childhood friends would always wonder if they were truly friends or just approved companions. The psychological toll was carefully hidden behind her polished smile. Anxiety attacks before major events, sleepless nights worrying about making a protocol error that would generate negative headlines, the constant hypervigilance required to never put a foot wrong. These were the hidden costs of the tiara. She couldn't seek therapy without palace approval, couldn't be seen as anything less than perfectly composed. As evening approached and William returned from his engagement, Catherine found herself staring at old photos on her approved personal device. Images from her university days, her gap year, her time as simply Kate Middleton. That girl seemed like a stranger now, someone who could make mistakes, have bad hair days, express opinions, and live without the weight of a nation's expectations. She touched the screen gently, remembering the freedom she'd traded for love and duty. Tomorrow would bring another round of engagements, another day of perfect behavior, another 24 hours of restrictions and requirements. But tonight, in these quiet moments before the children's bedtime, she allowed herself to remember what it felt like to be ordinary, knowing that tomorrow she would once again step into the gilded cage that was her destiny. The state funeral proceeded with clockwork precision. Catherine stood in her designated position, her face a mask of appropriate solemnity. Even grief had protocols. She couldn't cry too much, it would seem weak. She couldn't comfort others physically, it would break rank. Her mourning clothes had been selected by committee, her jewelry chosen for its symbolic significance. Personal sorrow was secondary to public performance. This was the future that stretched before her, decades of ceremonies where her individual feelings must be suppressed for the greater ceremonial good. She thought of the coronation that would one day come, when the crown would pass to William. Her own coronation as queen consort would be scripted down to the second, every movement choreographed by centuries of tradition. There would be no room for personal touches, no space for individual expression. The language restrictions had become second nature now, but they still chafed. Catherine could never use slang in public, never speak colloquially, never express herself in the casual way her contemporaries did. Every word was measured for its potential to offend, to be misinterpreted, to cause diplomatic incidents. She'd trained herself to speak in neutral tones about everything, to deflect with practiced phrases, to never truly say what she thought. Her legal status was particularly constraining. Catherine couldn't be sued, but neither could she sue others for defamation. Lies could be printed about her with impunity, and her only recourse was the palace's carefully worded statements. She couldn't defend herself directly, couldn't set the record straight in her own words, couldn't even correct the most basic misunderstandings about her life and choices. Travel restrictions had intensified as her position solidified. Certain countries were completely off-limits for security reasons. Others required such extensive diplomatic preparation that spontaneous visits were impossible. She couldn't backpack through Southeast Asia like her gap-year friends, couldn't take the children on educational trips to experience different cultures without turning it into a state visit. Every passport stamp was a political statement. The prohibition on commercial activities meant Catherine could never pursue any of the interests that had once defined her. Her art history degree was merely decorative now. She couldn't work in a gallery, couldn't deal in art, couldn't even serve on certain museum boards without creating conflicts of interest. The business ambitions she'd once harbored were forever closed to her. She would never run a company, never innovate, never create something that was truly hers. Her name itself was no longer her own. She was Catherine, Princess of Wales in formal settings, never Kate, despite that being how she'd known herself for decades. The media could call her Kate. Friends from before could still use the nickname, but officially, she'd been renamed by her position. Even signing birthday cards to her children required the formal signature. Physical contact with the public was governed by strict rules. She couldn't hug crying children spontaneously. Protocol officers would intervene. Handshakes had to be brief and proper. She'd learned to angle her body away slightly to discourage overly familiar approaches while still seeming warm. The natural tactile comfort she wanted to offer to those in distress was regulated and restricted. The restrictions on her children's lives pained her most deeply. George would never be able to choose his career freely. The military or public service were his only real options. Charlotte and Louis had more flexibility, but would always be defined by their proximity to the throne. They couldn't take gap years in Australia, couldn't study abroad without security details, couldn't fall in love with anyone without background checks and public scrutiny. Catherine watched other mothers at school events, chatting freely, making plans, living without constant surveillance. She stood apart, surrounded by protection officers, unable to join the casual conversations about weekend plans or holiday destinations. Other parents were polite but distant, unsure how to treat her. The normal bonds of motherhood were severed by her status. Her dietary restrictions extended beyond safety to image. She could never be photographed eating messily, never be caught with food in her teeth, never enjoy the simple pleasure of street food or casual dining. Every meal in public was a performance. She'd perfected the art of cutting food into tiny pieces, of eating without truly eating, of always leaving something on the plate to avoid seeming gluttonous. The mental load of constant perfection was exhausting. Catherine could never have a bad day publicly, never show frustration, never express the natural emotions anyone else could display. Road rage, eye-rolling, sighing in boredom. All normal human reactions were forbidden to her. She existed in a state of perpetual pleasantness that was itself a prison. Even death wouldn't free her from these restrictions. Her funeral was already planned, updated annually by palace officials. The guest list, the music, the readings, all decided by committee. Her legacy would be curated, her memory shaped by institutional needs rather than personal truth. She would be remembered as they chose to remember her, not as she truly was. As Catherine stood at the window of Buckingham Palace, watching the crowds below, she reflected on the complete transformation of her existence. The girl who'd met William in a Scottish university town was gone, replaced by a figure of state, a symbol rather than a person. Every freedom she'd surrendered had been for love, for duty, for the greater good of the institution. She touched her hand to the glass, feeling the barrier between herself and the world beyond. Tomorrow would bring another day of restrictions, protocols, and carefully managed appearances. The weight of future queenship pressed down upon her, decades of limitations stretching ahead, each year adding new rules, new restrictions, new ways in which her personal autonomy would be sacrificed for the crown. Yet in quiet moments, when the cameras were gone and the duties completed, Catherine allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what she'd given up. The freedom to speak her mind, to travel unplanned, to raise her children without state interference, to pursue her own interests, to be imperfect, to be human, all sacrificed on the altar of royal duty. The setting sun painted the palace walls golden, and Catherine turned away from the window. It was time to dress for the evening state banquet, to pin on the appropriate order, to smile the practiced smile. She would play her part perfectly. As always, the woman who had traded every personal freedom for a lifetime of service, trapped forever in the golden cage of royalty. The restrictions that bound her were silk-wrapped chains, beautiful to behold but unbreakable nonetheless, defining every moment of her existence from now until her carefully choreographed final breath.